These instructions are for making the wall plate for the shaker peg shelf. That's what the wall plate's going to look like when it's all finished. You can see we have a bunch of holes to lay out and drill. We have different size holes. Some holes go all the way through, some holes don't go through. So it's important to really pay attention to what holes we're laying out and what holes we're drilling. So how do we get to this part? Let's start here. So what we've got is we've got a square board. Doesn't look like a square, right? It looks like a rectangle, but we say it's square because I got a 90-degree corner here, 90-degree corner here, 90, 90. And also, right, this surface and this surface are 90, 90, 90. So that's what we call a square board. It is 32 inches long by 4 inches wide. So here's a little sketch of that wall plate. Notice I have not included the curvy ends on both ends because I think this drawing here is complicated enough. We've got a lot of things going on, lots of numbers and dimensions. So let's start by looking at this. Right? We want this thing to be 32 inches when it's finished. So in order to do that, let's do this. Step number one is to rough to length on the miter saw, and we always go a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go to 33 inches. Step number two, we do not have to joint edges with this lumber because it's S4S. So step number two is going to be to rip to width on the table saw at 4 inches. Step number three, we want nice square corners. So step number three is called square the ends, and that's where we're going to go to the miter saw and we just take a sliver cut on each end. Step number four is going to be to finish to length. So just a little reminder, when we're measuring, we don't measure across at a diagonal. We measure so that the tape measure is parallel to the edge of the board. We go ahead and we're going to measure out this time to 32. All right, step four, finish to length on the miter saw, 32. What I do is I put a little mark at 32. I use my speed square. And again, I hook the speed square on, I slide it over so it lines up with that little mark. I trace the line. I put a little check mark on this side of the line. I know this is my scrap side. This is the part that I'm going to keep. So when I go over to the miter saw, right, we know that we do not, this is my miter saw, we do not cut right down on the line. We cut right next to the line, and when we're done, I should still be able to see a little bit of that pencil mark. Okay, that was step four. Step five, we need to lay out a bunch of holes. So our bunch of holes are, we need 3 holes in the middle here, and they're going to be for the shaker peg shelf, or sorry, the shaker pegs. We've got 2 holes here. Now, these 2 holes are going to be used to screw the shelf to the wall when this thing's all finished. All right, and it's important that we know that the distance from here to here is 16 inches. So from the center of one hole to the center of the other hole is 16 inches. The reason we do that, and I'm going to show you a picture, is that inside your walls are generally hollow, and inside the walls, every 16 inches every 16 inches there's a what we call a stud. from the center of one stud to the center of the next stud is 16 inches. And what we want to do is when you put this shelf up, you want to screw into a stud. We can't just screw into drywall because drywall is not that strong, and if we put a heavy weight on the shelf, it's going to come crashing down. Okay, so that's what we got those for. These holes over here, they're going to be used to screw the wall plate to our brackets. So let's start with the 3 holes that are going to be for the shaker peg shelf. When you look at this drawing, what we've done is we've measured from the end to the center hole to start with, and then we measured from this center hole back to the left a certain distance and back to the right a certain distance, and that distance is 5 7/8. So let me show you this. I stretch my tape measure out, I put a mark at 16, use my speed square again, and I'm going to push it a little heavier here so you can see it. I've got a line. Now I know I need to go 5 7/8 to the right and 5 7/8 to the left. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to use a ruler. So we've got these rulers here. They're flexible. They actually show up nice on the camera. 0 is not right at the end. It's right here. So I just go ahead and I line up my 0, and I'm looking for 5 7/8. Now this ruler here happens to be, the increments are in 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go to 5, and then I'm going to go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so I put a mark at 5 7/8 away from here. Then I'll slide it over, and I think this time I'm going to start at 5 7/8. There's my 5 7/8, and I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to put a line at 0, a mark at 0. I always use my speed square. So now I got 1, 2, 3 lines, and then we're going to go back and we're going to look at the drawing again, and we're going to find out that these holes are in the middle of the width of the board. So the board was 4 inches wide, so they're 2 inches from the bottom edge or from the top edge. So what I do is I hook my tape measure on. I'm going to put a mark right at 2. I'm going to put a mark right at 2. And I'm going to put a mark right at 2. So now maybe we can look at the holes that we're going to use to screw to the wall. You can see here on our sketch, I said from the left edge to the first hole is going to be 8. So I'm going to go ahead, stretch my tape measure out, put a mark at 8. Now, from this hole to the next hole is 16. I want you to see that number, 16. It's hard to measure though with a tape measure from a surface just from the surface to another surface. So let's do this. What is 16 plus 8? Well, that's 24. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stretch this out to 24. I'm going to go ahead and again use my speed square, draw my lines, and now we're talking about how far from the bottom edge is it? It's 1. So I stretch my tape measure out, put a mark at 1, put a mark at 1. All right, now we've got 4 more holes to go. 2 here, 2 here. I only dimension them on this side of the drawing here. So you can see here it's 3.5 inches in from the end. Well, it's also going to be 3.5 inches in from the end over here. I left them off left those dimensions off because I thought it was getting too confusing. So again, I hook my tape measure on, 3.5. Draw my line. Whoops. 3.5. Draw the line. And now you can see those holes are 1 inch up from the bottom and then 3 inches up from the bottom. So there's my 1, there's my 3, there's my 1, there's my 3. So that was step number 5, laying out the holes. For a note, I would say see the sketch. What tools are you going to use for this? Well, we used a variety of tools, right? We used a ruler, we used a tape measure, used a speed square, and a pencil. So now we're ready to drill some holes. But before we drill the holes, again, I'd always use an awl. Just put the point on the center with the softwood, just give it a good tap. So we've got a little dimple. So we're going to dimple all of these. And the reason we do that, so that it's easier to align the drill bit and so that the drill doesn't walk across the surface when we're ready to drill this in. So it's just more accurate. Now let's go ahead and look at these holes before we go to the drill press. We're going to start off with what we call a Forstner bit, 1/2 inch Forstner bit, the same bit we've been using for our other projects. Notice these 3 holes in the middle here, they go all the way through the board. Right? So when I say through, that means through. They go all the way through. So we have to be careful of that. When we're doing through holes, we're going to have a tendency to get tear out on the back side. So we have to figure out how to avoid that. Down here, we've got these holes here. Again, this is going to be the 1/2 inch Forstner bit, and we're only going down, say, 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch. Again, how did we gauge that when we're over the drill press? Right, the top of the drill bit should be just flush or sitting above the surface of the board when we're finished. And then finally, we're going to come back and we do what I call the clearance hole. So inside there's a clearance hole, a 3/16 of an inch clearance hole for the screws to go in. And over here, these are also going to be the 3/16 holes and 3/16 holes. So let's go to the drill press for step number 6, drilling holes, drill press. It's a diameter of a 1/2 inch Forstner bit, and we're only going to go down 3/8 of an inch deep. So I just went to the drill press and I drilled the hole. It goes all the way through. I started on top, I went all the way down through. Let's look what happens, potentially could happen on the back. This right there, that's tear out. That's not something that we want. We want to avoid tear out. Guess what? This would probably be the back of the project, and it's not the end of the world if it happens, but we want to be craftsmen and we don't want that to happen. So what should we do? The answer is, right, anytime you're drilling through a board, we have to put a scrap board underneath to support the wood fibers from tearing out. So I just went over the drill press and I drilled a couple holes all the way through. Let me show you the result. Okay, this right here, that's what we call tear out. There was nothing supporting the board, the wood fibers underneath the board, and so we get this ugly thing here called tear out. So how do we avoid that? How do we stop tear out? You know the answer, right? Anytime you drill a through hole, you need another board underneath to support those wood fibers. So you can see the results here. I got 3 holes going all the way through. You got 2 holes just going down that 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. Let me turn over the back. You can see no tear out. I did a nice job. So now we're ready for step 7, is going to be to drill the clearance holes. We know there is going to be a clearance hole right here. I'm going to use the hand drill for this. Got my support board underneath. So here we go. We got our holes drilled. Now I just want to point something out. This is the front of the board. The back of the board, right? The back of the board, we're missing 2 of the holes, which is what's supposed to happen. I forgot to do one here. So this is the back of the board. So this is where I'd like you to put your name. Okay, it's important that you put your name and period on everything. All right, so we've got all our holes taken care of. Now we've got this, what I'll call the contour or profile on the ends. What we're going to do, just like we've done before, is we're going to use a template. So we have these paper templates floating around. What we're going to do is just line it up to the edge, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to trace that profile. So, step 8, trace the profile with the template, done. Step 9 is what we're going to do is we're going to cut the contour or the profile. We're going to use the bandsaw for that. And just like before, I'm going to say what we want to do is we want to leave the line. When we're on the bandsaw, when you're all done on the bandsaw, I want to see this pencil mark still there. If you get into trouble, right, if your saw blade starts hitting a line, just stop and back up. Now we also have another issue here, is that the bandsaw, these are pretty tight curves. It's going to be hard for the bandsaw to go around these curves. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a series of relief cuts. We're going to relieve the pressure off the blade. So what's going to happen, we're going to come in here, we're going to make a cut. We're going to make a cut. So we're going to make a whole bunch of cuts. I almost call them like little feathers. Alright? A whole series of cuts. And again, they're just kind of in a random spot. They're in a random spot. These cuts are not going all the way to the curve. You can see I'm stopping just before the curve. So I'm going to go to the bandsaw and I'm going to show you what I mean. So here are all those cuts that I just made. Those are actual cuts on the bandsaw, and you can see you don't have to measure them out. They don't have to be in any particular order. You can see I just left some space between the end of the cut and the profile or contour that we're cutting to. Did the same thing on the other end. So now what I can do is I can actually go to the bandsaw and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut the contour. So I'm done cutting on the bandsaw. You can see I've left the curve. I've left the pencil mark. You can see my results are not very smooth. They're jagged. That's from my relief cuts. So what do you think the next step is? What is step number 10? Step number 10 is to sand the contour. What tool are you going to use to sand the contour? The spindle sander. And so step 10, sand contour, spindle sander, and the note is sand to the line. And there's what it looks like after I got done over in the spindle sander. It's pine, it sands really easy, so this is a much easier step than using the hardwood. So here we go. That was step 10, sand contour with the spindle sander. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do our rough and medium sand. Keeping in mind, this is the part of the shelf that we're going to see. So this surface here, rough, medium sand, the top is going to get covered. Nobody's going to see that, so you don't need to sand it. This here, the back, is against the wall. Nobody's going to see that, and we've already got this edge sanded. So just on the bottom right here. So that was step 11, rough and medium sand. That would be with the 80 and 120 grit sandpaper. Then we're going to stop. We're going to raise the grain. So step 12, raise the grain. Take a wet paper towel, wipe the whole thing down, get it nice and moist, let it dry, and then step 13, finish sand with a finish sander, and that is a grit of 220. All right. Good luck. What I want you to do is I want you to fill out the process planning worksheet for this board. So you're going to have 13 steps to making the wall plates.